Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got week 10 of our power rankings series. This is going to be my last power rankings video of the 2025 portion of the 25-26 season. So because of that, we got a very interesting one here. We saw some major shifts, including seeing another new #1 team in the power rankings this week. Stay tuned as we're going to go through the entire power rankings coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to the video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we're going to start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do it for all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. So just a quick recap here about my channel. If you haven't checked out my community posts tab yet, I do suggest you do that. But I did mention over there that this is going to be my last week of regularly scheduled videos. So as of Saturday, December 20th, I will no longer be doing regularly scheduled videos until the new year. I'm going to start back up on January 4th. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. I will have pre-recorded videos coming out periodically throughout my 2-week, I think it is, break. But over that time frame, I will not be doing regularly scheduled videos. This is going to be my last week of these regularly scheduled videos. So because of that, this is also going to be my last power rankings video before the new year. So we got a very interesting one to get to here. If you haven't already, also go check out my scripted video. Well, if the NHL had a script week 10, I posted it earlier today. It's a very good one. I think it's one of the better ones I've done so far. So if you haven't already, go check it out. It's on my channel. I'll maybe leave a link to it up in the YouTube cards. But in today's video, we got week 10 of our power ranking series. So as per usual, we'll go through the 3 honorable mentions and then the top 10 power ranking teams and see who's new #1 after the week 10 of the power rankings. So we'll start with the 3 honorable mentions. The first honorable mention of the 3 is the Tampa Bay Lightning. They went 2-1 last week. They had a pretty solid week. They started out the week extending their losing streak. They lost in a very narrow fashion to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Follow that up on the second half of a back-to-back by absolutely destroying the Montreal Canadiens. Then 2 days later, they chased Jacob Markstrom and obliterated the New Jersey Devils before they wound up losing in a shootout to once again the New York Islanders. They've lost the Islanders 3 times in the last 2 weeks. So the Islanders basically own Tampa right now. The 5 all possible 8 points, still being tied for top spot in the Atlantic Division. Not half bad stuff there from the Tampa Bay Lightning. They're still one of the better teams in the Atlantic Division. So I felt like it was right to put them back up into the honorable mentions after what was a pretty decent week, although I did have a couple of losses in there. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Kucherov, Point. Defensively, not looking too bad with a guy like Radish and a net. Even in the absence of Vasilevsky, Jonas Johansson's actually looked all right for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So very interesting note there. But the Lightning wound up going 2-1 last week, and that's why I put him as the 3rd honorable mention. The 2nd honorable mention this week is actually the 3rd honorable mention from last week, and that's the Montreal Canadiens. Just like the Tampa Bay Lightning, they went 2-1 this week. Had a pretty solid record for the Canadiens. They wound up starting out the week with that bad loss that we just talked about to the Tampa Bay Lightning, but ended the week with a 3-game point streak, having a 4-2 win over Pittsburgh and Jacob Fowler's first career NHL game. A lot of great Habs goaltenders have started their careers starting in Pittsburgh against the Penguins, and Jacob Fowler's no different. A solid win there from the young goalie in his first NHL game. Then they blew a big lead and lost 5-4 in overtime to the Rangers before they finished off the week with a 4-1 win impressively over the Edmonton Oilers. So 5 possible 8 points, 2 out possible 4 wins. They're still only 1 point back of Tampa for top spot in the Atlantic Division. So because of that, I'm putting the Montreal Canadiens as the 2nd honorable mention. Offensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Bolduc, with guys like Anderson. Defensively, not looking too bad with guys like Noah Dobson. And in net, Fowler in his NHL debut did great stuff for the Canadiens. So all in all, solid stuff there for Montreal. They are the 2nd honorable mention. The 1st honorable mention is actually last week's 2nd honorable mention, and that is the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers had a pretty solid week. They also went 2-1 last week. They started out the week with a bad overtime loss to the Buffalo Sabres. Then they took down the Detroit Red Wings. They made a trade for Tristan Jarry, and Tristan Jarry's Oilers debut, they took down the Toronto Maple Leafs 6-3, and then they put Pickard in and lost, like we just talked about, to the Montreal Canadiens. So just like the Canadiens, they went 2-1. They were a little bit better, in my opinion, than the Habs were this week, and even though the Habs that beat them, going to keep them a little bit ahead as the 1st honorable mention. They made that trade for Tristan Jarry. It was a very interesting interesting one. Not sure if the Oilers really won it, but it's a change, and some change needed to happen in net, so very interesting note there. They also acquired Spencer Stastny from Nashville, so really solid stuff there from the Oilers, making some moves, winning a couple of games this past week. They're back into a playoff spot, so because of all of that, I'm putting them as the first honorable mention. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with McDavid, Draisaitl. Defensively, Nurse doing pretty good, and in net, Skinner to start the week and Jar to finish the week could both actually look quite good, so very interesting note there. But the Oilers are the first honorable mention this week. So now going over to the top 10 teams in the power rankings for this week. So at the 10th spot and falling from number 9 last week is the New Jersey Devils. They did not do overly good last week. They were 500, they went 2-0. They did just enough to remain in the power rankings, but they are still on very thin ice. They started out with a very narrow 4-3 win over the Ottawa Senators. Then, like we said, they got their butts whooped by the Tampa Bay Lightning. Then they took down the Anaheim Ducks in impressive fashion before they lost a very narrow game to a new-look Vancouver Canucks team. So very interesting note there. They went 2-0 for a possible 8 points to a possible 4 wins. They're still around a playoff spot. I'm not sure if they're exactly in a playoff spot right now, but they're like, I think, 1 or 2 points out of a playoff spot if they're not in it. So like, they're still in a really good position. They're still dealing with some injuries. So because of all that, I'm giving them a little bit of leeway, but they are still very nice to be bumped out of the top 10 of the power rankings. But still, this team's looking pretty good offensively. Heischer, Meyer, Platt doing pretty good offensively. Defensively, Hamilton, Nemeth doing pretty good defensively, and in net, Markstrom, even though he was pulled against Tampa, has been doing pretty good for the Devils. So very interesting note there. But Jersey wound up going 2-0, and that is why they are 10th in the power rankings, 9th in the power rankings this week. After they were an honorable mention last week, that is the Detroit Red Wings. The Red Wings had a very solid week last week. They went 3-1-0. They started the week with a shutout victory over the Vancouver Canucks. Then were pretty dominant throughout the first 50 minutes of the game. Made it close at the end of it, but they did beat the Calgary Flames 4-3 in the second half of a back-to-back loss to the Edmonton Oilers. And then they wound up taking down the Chicago Blackhawks in shutout fashion again 4-0. So very good stuff. They had 2 shutouts this week. They won 3 out of possible 4 games, got 6 out of possible 8 points. The Red Wings did pretty good. They're tied with the Lightning for top spot in the Atlantic Division. So because of all those things, I'm going to put them into the power rankings and put them as the 9th spot. The only Atlantic Division team right now in the top 10. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Raymond, Finney, DeBrincat. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like ASP and Sider, and in net, Gibson is starting to heat up. So very good stuff there from Detroit. They are 9th in my power rankings. 8th in the power rankings this week, and falling from the 5th spot last week is the Washington Capitals. They only played 2 games this week. They were both losses. They kept their point streak going with a shootout loss to the Carolina Hurricanes before they got their butts whooped by a now Hellebuck-led Winnipeg Jets team 5-1. So once again, only getting 1 out of possible 4 points, losing both their games. I'm going to bump them down a little bit. They're still one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. They still have a really solid record, so because of that, I'm going to not bump them down too far, but they are going to be going down to 8th in the power rankings after what was a really subpar week for the Washington Capitals. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Ovechkin, with Strome, with Bouvillier. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Chychrun and Carlson, and in net, Logan Thompson's been doing pretty good for the Washington Capitals. So all in all, they had a losing record, but still a decent week there from the Capitals as they were able to at least get a point against Carolina. Then at the 7th spot, remaining there from last week, we have the Vegas Golden Knights. They got 5 all possible 6 points this week. They went 2-0-1 and are now up to a 16-6-9 record. They started out the week with a 5-4 shootout loss to a red-hot New York Islanders team, in which they had to tie the game up in the dying seconds of the 3rd period. Then they wound up getting a 3-2 overtime win over the Philadelphia Flyers, and then a 3-2 regulation win over the Columbus Blue Jackets. So got 5 all possible 6 points against 3 Metro Division teams. Wound up going 4-0-1 on their road trip. So Vegas is looking really good. They're back up to top spot in the Pacific Division, so really good stuff there. They're still one of the best teams in the Western Conference, so that's why I'm going to keep them. I did consider moving them up a little bit, but I'm going to keep them as the 7th spot in the power rankings. Offensively, the team is looking pretty good with Eichel, with Stone, with Bauman. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Theodore and Hanifin, and in net, Hart is looking pretty good in his start as the Vegas Golden Knight. So very interesting note there. Solid stuff there from Vegas. Top spot in the Pacific Division, and the remaining at the 7th spot in the power rankings. 6th spot in the power rankings, and falling from 3rd last week is the Anaheim Ducks. They went 1-2-0 last week and fell out of top spots in the Pacific Division. They started the week with a very narrow 4-3 shootout victory in Pittsburgh, in which they tied the game up with 0.1 seconds left, so really good stuff there. But they followed that up with back-to-back 3 3-goal losses, one to the New York Islanders and one to the New Jersey Devils, as we just mentioned. So once again, the Devils, the Islanders are two of the best Metro Division teams at this point in time, so I'm not going to fault them too much, which is why I'm not bumping them even further. But still, like, only one win out of a possible 3, only 2 points out of a possible 6. You want to see the Ducks do a little bit better than that, but still, I'm not going to bump them down too much. So very good stuff there from the Ducks. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Gauthier, with Seneca, with McTavish. Defensively, Lacombe, Mitnikov looking pretty good, and in net, Dostal has returned and is looking pretty good. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Ducks, as they wind up going 1-2-0. They do fall in the Pacific, but I'm going to only bump them down to 6th in the power rankings. 5th in the power rankings, and bumping up from the 8th spot last week to now have a record of 19-11-3 is the New York Islanders. They went 3-0-0 last week. They were undefeated. As we mentioned before, they took down the Golden Knights in a shootout. They took down the Anaheim Ducks 5-2, and they took down the Bolts in a shootout 3-2. So really solid stuff there from the Islanders, who in the last 2 weeks have won 6 of 7 games. They're 8 games above 500, and for a small window on Saturday, were the best team in the Eastern Conference. So the Islanders are playing completely sound hockey right now, and because of that, I have to bump them up to the 5th spot in the power rankings. The offensively, team's looking pretty good with Barzal, with Ritchie, with Shabanov. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Schaefer and guys like maybe even Travis Mitchell. And in net, Sorokin is being Sorokin and is doing great stuff for the Islanders. So all in all, the Islanders now 8 games above 500. At one point, we're leading the Eastern Conference, and because of those things, and bumping them up to the 5th spot in the power rankings. At the 4th spot in the power rankings, and bumping up from 6th spot last week, is the Minnesota Wild. Just like the Islanders, they were undefeated, but they had one extra game. They went 4-0-0. They started the week with a very impressive victory over the Seattle Kraken 4-1. Then they ended the Dallas Stars' long point streak, taking them down 5-2. Then with a really banged up roster, they were able to take down the Ottawa Senators 3-2. And then after trading for Quinn Hughes, and Quinn Hughes' Minnesota Wild debut, he would score against the Boston Bruins and help the Wild win 6-2 over Boston. 4 out of possible 4 wins. 8 out of possible 8 points. They're up to a 19-9-5 record, and because of that, I'm bumming them up to 4th spot in the Central Division. They're a top 5 team points-wise as well in the NHL standings, so like I think they deserve it with the run of play they've had since the start of November. This team is on an absolute heater, and they just got better with Quinn Hughes. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Eric Sneck, Kaprizov, Johansson. Defensively, great stuff from guys like Faber and Quinn Hughes. And in net, Wallstead still being Wallstead and being a brick wall in net for Minnesota. So all in all, very good stuff there from the Minnesota Wild as they improve to 19-9-5 and are up to 4th in the power rankings. 3rd in the power rankings is actually last week's #1 team. That is the Dallas Stars. They had a rather sour week, going 1-2-0 as they're down to a 21-7-5 record. Not great stuff there from the Dallas Stars. They start out the week pretty well with a victory over the Winnipeg Jets in narrow fashion. Then, like we said, the Wild ended their win and point streak, and then the Florida Panthers shut them out to end the week. So it was definitely not a great end to the week. They're still one of the best teams in the NHL. They're still fighting with the Avalanche for the top spot in the NHL standings. So because of that, I'm going to say they ran into a couple of really solid teams in Minnesota and Florida, and they've just fallen a couple of spots. I'm not going to bump them down too much because they are still a really good team, but they do take a little bit of a hiccup, so that's why I bumped them out of the top spot in the power rankings for week 10. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Rantanen, Johnston, Duchesne. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Harley and Heiskanen, and in net, Anger's been Anger. So really good stuff there from Dallas, but after being 1 last week, they're down to 3. Second in the power rankings this week, and bumping up from the 4th spot last week, is the Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes had a solid week, just like the Minnesota Wild. They went 4-0-0. They started the week with a win over the Columbus Blue Jackets. Then, like we talked about, a shootout victory over Washington before they ended with back-to-back shootout victories in a home-and-home with Philadelphia. So 4 impressive victories against Metro Division teams, and now has the Carolina Hurricanes in sole possession of the Eastern Conference. So because of that, I'm going to bump them up into a 2nd spot in the power rankings. They're the best team in the Eastern Conference. I think it's deserved. Offensively, looking pretty good with Svechnikov, Jarvis, Aho. Defensively, not looking too shabby Gabby, with guys like Gossespierre and newly returning Jacob Slavin, and in net, Brendan Boosie has been an absolute revelation in net for the Carolina Hurricanes. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Hurricanes as they go 4-0-0 and regain top spot in the Eastern Conference. And the new number one team is actually the number one team that's been the past couple of weeks, except last week, and that is the Colorado Avalanche. Another solid week there from the Avalanche as they go 2-0-1 on the week. Not bad stuff there from Colorado. They started the week with a very surprising shootout loss to the Nashville Predators before they utterly destroyed the Florida Panthers 6-2 and then took down the Nashville Predators 4-2. So very interesting note there, really solid stuff there. They got 3 possible 4 points against Nashville. They got 5 possible 6 points on the week. They gained a little bit on the Dallas Stars in the standings. So because of all of that, the Avalanche going back into the first spot in the power rankings. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with McKinnon, Nelson, Colton. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Malinsky and Taves. And in net, Wedgwood still being Wedgwood for the Colorado Avalanche. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Avalanche as they continue to find ways to win, and they're back to first in the power rankings. So just to recap here, here's the teams who I took out and put in the power rankings. Not too much change this week. I took out the Seattle Kraken for the first time all season. They had a terrible week, so I think it was only right to take them out of the power rankings. And because of their solid week this past week, Detroit, who was on honorable mention last week, goes in. Those are the only 2 changes I made in the power rankings. But just to recap, here's my top 10 power rankings in the NHL for this week. So the 10th spot, you have the New Jersey Devils. 9 is Detroit. 8 is Washington. 7 is Vegas. 6 is Anaheim. 5 is NYI. 4 is Minnesota. 3 is Dallas. 2 is Carolina. And the number one team getting back into the number one spot is the Colorado Avalanche. Definitely. That's all I want to talk for today. I'll let you guys thoughts as of week 10, the week before the Christmas break. Who would you have 1 through 10 in the NHL? Do you think I got very close to it, or would you disagree with me? Definitely touch on all of that down in the comment section below. Leave your top 10 rankings right now in the comment section below. That's all I want to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're listening, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to without you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. Also, a blog to news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. I'll link to it in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.